All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Natty News Daily podcast. It is James and Dan, maybe joined by Leroy in a couple minutes here. You guys know how it is if you are a father. It's always fun. You never know what's going on. And we are joined today with Zachary Moore, who's been taking the internet by storm for a couple different reasons that we were just talking about off air. One, as kind of an advocate for bodybuilders who are type 1 diabetics and also just with some other fun controversies, which I'm sure we'll dive into. But relatively unknown athlete. This will be your first competitive season, gearing
Yep.
up for that show in the fall, I believe, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, let's.
First show would be ANBF Ocean State, I'm thinking.
Okay, jumping into Mike's show. Yeah, that'll be a
Mhm.
fun one,
You're
right? Like,
friends with
Yeah.
Mike, aren't you?
Yes.
You've
Yeah.
trained with him? Yeah.
We've lifted a couple times now.
yeah, he's a good guy. I haven't met a single person yet that doesn't like him. I think he just gives off that vibe of like I want everyone to succeed, and he truly
Yeah.
that. And
Yes.
we just need more of that in the sport, right? So
He's
yeah,
an awesome person.
I'd love to hear that you're supporting that show and supporting him because yeah, like we need people like him to succeed to kind of like weed out some of the others that are probably in it for the
Yeah,
wrong.
because he cares.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, cool. Well, nice little plug for that anyway already, right? So
Mhm.
and maybe we'll get a couple more athletes going to that show to see you in person to match up again.
Right.
But let's hear a little bit about the background, right? Like I think you said on one post you've been lifting since you were about 15 or so.
Mhm.
Let's dive into a little bit because like I said, you're relatively unknown as of yet.
Yeah. I started getting into bodybuilding through watching YouTube videos like Alberto. Uh,
Mhm.
my sophomore year of high school. Before that, I was only doing like calisthenics, like handstand, planche, push-up type stuff.
Mhm.
And once I started going to the gym, I was pretty big before going to the gym, but then once I started, it just hyper responded immediately. Like there's a picture on my IG of me at 15, and it was like in the first year of me training, and I looked silly, and then it's just gotten worse since then.
Worse or better?
However you want to frame it.
When so yeah, with you being like almost like a hyper responder, gifted genetically, however you want to like term it, when did you realize that that was the case and that you were like just far like exceeding like your peers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I was pretty ignorant at first, but I would be in the gym and I would have people saying like, you look ridiculous, and I wasn't exposed to bodybuilding really at that point. Seeing different physiques and how much variation there is. So I wasn't really appreciative of what I'd been given really at that point. But over time, I've realized, yeah, there's something different.
Yeah. What kind of, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of gym was it you were lifting, right? Because I feel like sometimes the gym atmosphere itself it kind of like gears you towards one way or the other. And like if you're around people that are high level bodybuilders, like you have
Yeah.
to prepare yourself, or if you're at like the local YMCA and you're the only guy in shape,
Mhm.
it's kind of tough.
It was a workout world,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
was a great gym. Like it was actually set up pretty well for bodybuilding. And it did have like a lot of pretty gifted athletes there, just in circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said, right off the bat, it was Berto that you were kind of following and training and watching his videos. Who else from that kind of like group, or was that kind of the guy that really got you into it?
So
I just had this conversation the last
yeah,
time. I feel like I got to ask now.
Omar Isuf was my introduction to Alberto. That was how I found Alberto. But
Mhm.
then like Christian Guzman was a big one. That what was his name? Goku Gaines. And then
Mhm.
I remember Goku. Yeah.
yeah, no, just guys like that. What the heck's his name? He was just he competed last year, and it was his first time in a while.
You thinking of
Big
like Jeff Side?
popular guy. No, he hasn't posted as much recently. How am I forgetting his name? No,
Who's
but
he kind of associated with?
associated with, I think he does his own thing. But
It's gonna
no,
be in like 15 minutes. We'll be like deep into another
I'll
conversation.
remember it. Yeah,
We'll let people guess in the comments section who
sure.
from they can kind of like make the
It wasn't
connection.
Matt Ogus, was it?
It
No,
was
not
Matt
Matt.
Ogus. That's who it was. Thank you.
Okay. There
Yeah,
you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
dude, he commented on my thing, one of my posts a while ago, and that was unreal. Like going full circle, watching this guy when I was a kid, and then having him acknowledge me. It was sick.
Well, that's the beauty of this sport too. Like Dan and I have seen it, and I would feel pretty safe saying that compared to, not to discredit you, Dan, but like Zach, your potential in the sport is vastly superior to ours, probably. You're gonna find it though, as soon as you start competing, like you just start making friends with all these guys who you've idolized and
Hmm.
up to, and now they're just people that you like have general conversations with,
Yeah.
even families. It's a really great community if you allow it to be.
Hmm.
It's based on like the athlete's personality, right? And
Yeah.
you're into it seemingly with a really good like outlook and a good personality and
Hmm.
wanting to actually grow the community and not just like be that guy that sits in the corner angrily and I'm here to win kind of, we're all
Yeah,
here. But
for sure. That's how it felt when I went to Worlds this past year in Boston. Going there, and it was just immediately just the sense of overriding community and people wanting improvement overall, not just for themselves, but for everybody collectively. It was incredible.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of like a family
Yeah,
reunion.
don't put your ass in. Oh my goodness.
That's the thumbnail now. Yeah, I mean, it's like a family reunion every time we go to a show and we meet new people every single time, or you meet someone finally that you've been talking to on social media for like 5 years, and it just
Yeah.
you know them so well. So yeah, I'm excited to see, where that takes you.
Hmm.
Dan, did
Yeah,
you have
that'll be fun.
before we kind of like dive into like the deeper stuff?
No, keep rolling.
Yeah. So, we can talk like it's seemingly bodybuilding's been the interest from the get-go, right? Like that
Mhm.
was following, here you are now. Like I can't imagine there was too much in the interim that like deviated from that, right?
No, just bodybuilding the whole time.
Yeah. So why now, right? Like you've taken quite a few years to grow. Like what was it that said like this is the year that I'm going to start competing?
How old are you right now, by the way?
27.
27. So you've been living 12 years then, right? You
Yeah.
said 15? Yep.
Hmm.
Cool.
Getting diagnosed with type 1 in 2020, and then I started attending diabetes youth camps and having this response from the kids that suddenly had they started taking an interest in exercise, asking me questions on how to do things and flexing at me, stupid, silly things. But seeing the positive response from a community that I'm passionate about made me realize that there could be more to this than just lifting weights. Because before that, I never, like, I considered competing, but I could never find a why, like something that would provide a fulfilling avenue through competing. But now that I realize that I can actually help people, I have a reason to step on stage.
What was that diagnosis like in 2020?
It was pretty unreal. I became incredible. I had the telltale symptoms, like um, incredibly thirsty. I couldn't drink enough water. I was consuming like well over 2 gallons of fluids a day, and half of it was sugary. Of course, it was just accelerated the process of DKA. I was still going to the gym like an idiot. My fatigue levels were so low. I had no chance at maintaining the training that I'd been doing to that point. But I wanted to hit PRs, and so I started doing like 35 rep new PRs just so that I could mentally have like that's progress. It wasn't. I was actually eating my muscle during DKA, but I lost 30 pounds over the course of a month. And towards the end, I lost 6 pounds over the course of like 12 hours. It was insane. What drove me to finally go to the hospital was blurry vision. Um, as DK progresses, you start to develop neuropathy, and that was the beginning stages of that. Was the nerves behind my eyeballs were starting to become damaged, and so that was terrifying.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And for those that don't know, DK is diabetic ketoacidosis. If
Mhm. Sorry, but
so yeah, I picked up on
yeah.
it. Just so those that like aren't really aware can kind of look
Mhm.
into it a little bit more to know like what
Yes.
you're going through at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what causes that is there isn't like an established reason or cause for type 1 diabetes, but the general consensus is that you have a predisposition genetically to develop type 1, and it needs an environmental trigger like a virus. And they think that I might have had COVID, and that there was a huge uptick in type 1 cases during the pandemic. So it wouldn't be too outside of the realm to say that COVID was particularly good at causing that trigger. But, my dad has celiac, and celiac is very strongly tied genetically to the development of type 1 diabetes. And so I definitely had the unlucky hand of cards, and it just worked out that a virus entered my body. Your body starts to produce antibodies to kill the virus. And it just so happens that these antibodies also kill the beta cells in your pancreas, which are responsible for producing insulin.
Yeah. How many are you aware of like the statistics? Because, when it's generally taught, it's taught that like type 1 you're born with. So you think of like an infant, right? Or like someone very,
Right.
very young. What's the percentage of individuals like yourself that are, 20, like older individuals that kind of like have this onset? Do you know?
No, but it's very low because overall type 1s only make up less than 1% of overall diabetics. And that, to have the late onset is much less common. You are typically diagnosed within the first few years of being born, but no, I'm not. It is very low though.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, like you said, it's relatively unheard of versus the type 2, which is kind of like environmental
Yeah.
norm. So, yeah. So how did, obviously you had to go through, that whole process. Were you hospitalized at that point, or was it just kind of like testing and then you got prescription and things went up from there? What was the kind of turnaround point for you?
So I went to my primary care. They tested my blood with a finger prick, and I topped off their meter. So it was well over 700 milligrams per deciliter. And just for the people not in the know, ideally you want to be between 70 and 180 milligrams of glucose per deciliter of blood. If you're below that, you're hypoglycemic. If you're above that, you're hyperglycemic. And when you're not producing insulin, you start to go up in blood sugar. But I topped off their blood sugar meter. They put me in an ambulance to go to the hospital. They said I was like a day away from going into a coma. And then I was in there for a few days. They were re-upping my, what are they? The electrolytes. They had to rebalance that, pumping saline into my body. And then they had me on insulin, which was made a big change like immediately. And I was feeling, of course, because prior to that, there was no energy metabolism going on in my body. And what was occurring was my body eating itself to produce energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, recovery from that, right? Like you said, then, massive amounts of weight loss. Did the vision and everything clear up kind of right away, or was this like a months long, year long process type deal?
No, it cleared away pretty quick, luckily. I was also losing a bunch of hair during that. You could imagine that it was an entire body stress because you're no longer metabolizing energy correctly, and so it's a whole body panic.
Yeah. Yeah. So you came out of that. You didn't give up, obviously, because here you are, right? Built the body back, built
Mhm.
everything. And I love the fact, circling back to what you mentioned, because we didn't bring it up enough. Like you are one of the individuals that I feel like are prime of examples of what bodybuilding should be, where like you compete for a specific reason, not just to compete.
Sure.
Some of us, myself included, like I compete just because I need to feel competitive, but like
Yeah.
said, like you didn't do it until there was an external and like valid reason where you felt like you could, help a group of people, or there was
Right.
something else behind it. So, timeline wise, just because I'm blanking a little bit on it, right? You said
Mhm.
when was that camp that kind of like triggered that for you?
That was in July of last year.
Okay. So, about 4 years pretty much in between. 'Cause you said 2020 was around the time that, this all went down for you. So in those 4 years, was it just kind of back to training and trying to just get everything stabilized and rebuild everything?
Oh wait, no, it was I did a winter weekend camp in March, and then I started doing that was when I hooked up with Alberto,
Okay.
and then I did the summer camp. But what was the question again? Sorry.
Well, just kind of like what's the in between, right? So like from the diagnosis, from the recovery to like now, was it just kind of like typical, I'm going to get back into training? What was that journey like for you? Like kind of rebuilding everything that you had lost?
I didn't even think about it like that. It was just like I was doing this before. I'm gonna start doing it again because I enjoy it, and that was it. I rarely think past the bridge of my nose, and so it was like um, that. All I had to do was learn how to be a diabetic instead, and then
Get back into normal routine and just
yeah,
introduce insulin, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only reason I bring that up is because, and I was hoping you were about to say that this is your lifestyle. These are just like habits that you have, right? Like it's not
Yeah,
something that you're like forcing yourself to do and like trying to be something that you're not, where we've seen examples of individuals that suffer like these huge setbacks, massive injuries, surgeries,
mhm,
whatever, and they just can't cope with the idea of like having lost the progress, and then they go enhanced and
yeah,
take, for lack of better terms, take the shortcut because
mhm,
they've attached themselves to the identity of being that larger person,
right.
the habits and the lifestyle necessarily.
Yeah, I was
Which
melted after during my diagnosis. I looked like a shell of myself, but I just looked at it as another opportunity to try and progress, and I made a lot of progress, going from the reset strength to trying to get back to where I was, which was fun in and of itself. It's like these are easy gains. It's behind where I was before, but having that constant improvement was nice because there's the muscle memory involved, and so I knew it wasn't going to be too long to get back to where I was, but
how long did it take for you?
I think it was like 4 months before I felt like I was like, okay, this is about where I was.
Okay. But you hadn't been feeling good going into the diagnosis. How long before, when did those symptoms start before the diagnosis? Roughly? Like
It's
how long?
Yeah, it was probably like a month of just
Okay.
slow increase in
Yeah.
in degree of feeling the symptoms.
Gotcha.
Yeah, man, that's it's a remarkable story, and these are the episodes that I love doing, right? Because it gives such a different like light on the sport and why people do it, rather than just like the vain reasons that I think a lot of people assume we all do what we do.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
I
let's go
that
ahead.
you bring up I had a post about this, but it started in the diabetes group chat because of course people are going to ask me about steroids, and my response to that was, does will having more muscle make you a happier person? And if your answer is yes to that, ask yourself why. Like why does it matter to have more muscle? If you need to if you can't just be happy with training, I don't think you're ever going to be happy in bodybuilding.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a whole thing, right? Because it's not like you're ever going to hit that point where you say like, ah, yes, I have enough muscle. Like this is it, right? No,
Exactly.
no bodybuilder has ever reached that. And if you think you're going to, you're not, right? Like
Mhm.
saying like you're never as big as your pump, right? So it's if that's what you're chasing, you're forever going to be chasing it and you'll forever be
Yeah,
unhappy with what you have.
but chasing progress and like self-improvement, it's so rewarding, and you feel like you get happier doing it instead of chasing something that you're never going to be able to attain because it's subjective. But
Mhm.
objective progress, it's like I'm doing something. This is great.
Mhm. Yeah. Daniel, it looks like you had something to say there on top of that.
Nothing particularly on that exactly. I have some other questions, but
Yeah,
Sure.
no,
don't
dive in.
want to derail. Um, so, with, transitioning, got diagnosed, okay, I've got to take insulin. What were the biggest challenges for you to manage with that, with introducing insulin? Was it figuring out when you should be taking it, how you should be taking it? Was it a challenge to, figure out around your, I mean, I'm not diabetic. I have a
Sure.
few, or I have a family member who is diabetic,
Yeah.
cousin, but um, I'm not in the weeds of it. So like managing training, like carbohydrates within, while you're training, like what were some of the things you did? What was some of the challenges? Did you always have to have some Sour Patch Kids on hand during
Yes,
training, or
I do. I
is that
do
your
always
candy of
have
choice?
like it for a while it was, but
I
I
love it.
I
What's
stopped
what's the
being
best
able to
Sour Patch
control
Kid?
myself.
What's the
I
best
like
Sour Patch?
I like the green.
Green. Green's probably my third.
You have a ranking for Sour Patch Kids off the top of your head.
I'd say so, yeah.
Uh, Zach,
Red, red,
if
red,
if
blue,
you get to know
red,
Dan,
blue, green, yellow,
surprise you.
orange.
That that's awesome.
I think I
But
posted on my page a while back too,
yeah,
but yeah, I had rankings.
my
Yeah.
go-to used to be the Sour Patch Kids, but I stopped because it's a big portion, and I wouldn't be able to stop eating them after I'd already corrected. So then I would have to take more insulin, and so I they have gummies now. They're a smaller portion, so I can practice more self-control with that.
Are they like a specific type of gummy, any specific type of carbohydrate or fancy gummy, or just a gummy?
No, and
What's that?
Sorry, I think cut off for a second. Were they specific? Are they a specific type of gummy, or is it just a normal gummy? Is there a specific type of sugar that's you find is better or
Well, there's a varying degree of a glucose response depending on the um, what's it called?
glycemic index? Or
Yes. Well, the glycemic index is useful, but glycemic load is more useful because that takes into account what's actually being ingested versus just like a qualitative number of the item as a whole. The glycemic load it tells you what this portion is going to do to my blood sugar.
okay,
And so you can just Google like glycemic load of X number of grams of carbs for this type, and it'll give you a great idea of what to expect in terms of blood sugar response.
gotcha. Are there any just another tangential topic? Are there any supplements or anything that you use? I know, like in for myself, I put cinnamon on a lot of my carbohydrate meals. I don't know if that's something you use or do you use. Have you tinkered with glucose disposal agents? Do you have any experience or thoughts on those? I use a GDA myself, but
I
like I
haven't
said, not
tried it, but
diabetic, so
yeah, I would be curious because I'd be able to see the data in real time, with the glucose monitor. So it would be cool to have a day where I have like comparable energy expenditures and then take in the same diet content wise and make it so that the only difference would be a glucose disposal agent and see what it does. That would be pretty cool.
yeah,
But no, I don't take any. I don't use
could start
cinnamon or supplements.
for that as a case study, right?
That would be fun, dude.
Yeah. Like you said, data's there, right? So if the only variable that's changing is that one supplement, I mean, you could make a huge pitch for that supplement. So hey,
Right.
any of our sponsors or anyone else wants to hook them up with some GDAs. I think it'd be interesting, right? Because like people like Dan and I, like yeah, like we'll throw some money at it, and
Sure.
mechanically or mechanistically it makes
yeah,
sense.
theoretically based on some studies, but like I don't really notice much really.
Sure.
But yeah, I'd be curious for you if
Yeah.
you would
I think there are
notice,
other
because you would
things.
notice.
Yeah, for sure. Like yohimbine, I think, is said to have a pretty good, or not yohimbine. There
Berberine.
starts with an A. It's like some
Hmm.
long one. But there's supplements out there they say that can have a positive effect on blood sugar. But I'm really hesitant to push any of that because I feel really uncomfortable encouraging people to spend their money. And
Yeah.
so it's like I'm gonna make sure that anything that I promote is of good value to the people buying it.
I'd be curious on cinnamon at least. Maybe cinnamon would be the first. I consider that nature's GDA.
My group chat is having an aneurysm right now over the cinnamon. It's like this ongoing meme for us that cinnamon is secretly the cure to diabetes. I've had people say that, dude. Dude, during diagnosis, this isn't to be mean to this ER nurse, but during my diagnosis, she was trying to tell me that all I have to do is take apple cider vinegar and my type 1 would be cured. And it's like, that's not her. It kind of is her fault, but it's not her fault. Don't be mean to the nurse. She was trying to help, but it's like there's so much misinformation about diabetes and treatments and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate.
Let's dive into that, right? Like what else are the things you've heard? What are like misconceptions? What are, myths? Let's dive into that whole rabbit hole because I'm sure between you and your group, like you guys have heard it all probably.
Oh yeah, you get a lot of the common questions from somebody that's not familiar with it, like, oh, you've probably just eaten too many sweets as a kid, or you got to lay off the candy and cake, and it's like,
That's type
I
2,
didn't have
bro.
a choice. Yeah, and even type 2 is more complicated than just like ingesting. It's more complicated than just being behavioral. There's multiple avenues that you can get to a type 2 diagnosis. Like there's gestational diabetes. You can get diabetes induced from chemotherapy. You can have diabetes from faulty receptors for insulin, which is different from not having insulin, and it's different from insulin resistance. It's the receptors themselves that aren't responding properly to your body's natural insulin. But they all end up with the same class of symptoms, hyperglycemia. And so they get categorized as diabetes.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, I guess we don't even need to. I was going to ask and get into the nitty gritty of like how you would even find that out if there were different like presentations that you might like, have a feeling of, am I this category versus that category? It might be too much detail for this podcast, but
There are a lot of tests, yeah, but there are so many different types that it would be a lot. But you can have a say where it's like you can determine if you're still producing insulin, and so that would narrow out whether it's your receptors or your natural insulin production.
yeah.
So there's ways of figuring it out.
Okay. So that's more on like the diagnostic side of things. What about like so because we're a bodybuilding podcast, right? We got to
Mhm.
ask because I know you get accused of being not natural every day on every post because you take
Right.
it. Let's talk that, right? Like it's so different, but people
Yeah,
don't understand it. So yeah, open up that can of worms for me.
it's been the best thing ever because it's like it boosts the post, and I get to help clarify these things. But um, so far, it hasn't seemed to help the comments yet, but we'll persevere. Um, so people see the word anabolic for insulin, and they assume that anabolic means builds muscle. But the textbook definition is a lot more nuanced than that. It's just producing complex molecules from simple molecules. The comparison I would make is I take glucocorticoids and corticosteroids for my asthma. Those are catabolic steroids. So if you took it at face value, someone would assume, oh, so those break down muscle. And it's like, no, because they have a specific mechanism of action. And so the words catabolic, anabolic aren't inherently linked to development or breakdown of muscle. They're complex metabolic processes.
Mhm. Yeah, and then specific to insulin, right? Like what would you say, right? So you've got a 15-year-old comes at you and says, well, like you take insulin, you can't be considered a natural, like you're fake. Like what's the response, right? Like because obviously I've seen these and I know like you said, you're trying to educate, so it's not just like shut up. So
Right.
like how do you approach that to that person that truly is just like ignorant to the fact of there being a difference?
I would assess if they actually are interested in learning
Mhm.
before saying anything, because I'm not going to waste my time trying to help somebody that isn't interested in being helped because they have this motive of trying to tear somebody else down so that they can be feel better about themselves. So if they genuinely are just unsure, then it's as simple as I don't produce insulin. I'm taking I can only take the exact correct amount. There is no play in it. If I take too much, I go hypoglycemic. I could risk death. I would have brain injury if I did it frequently enough. If I don't take enough, I go hyperglycemic. But ask any endocrinologist, the goal for a type 1 diabetic to be healthy is to take as little insulin as possible through increasing insulin sensitivity. If you can improve those markers, you're a better type 1 diabetic.
Mhm.
So, needlessly taking more insulin isn't going to produce a muscle building effect.
Yeah. No, I like it, right? Like I think that's a very succinct response to it. And you're right. Like some people are just saying things on the internet because they're behind a keyboard and they don't like truly want to learn. We see that in
Right.
all aspects, right?
For
It,
sure.
it's not a debate or a conversation. It's just my way or the highway kind of deal,
Yeah.
right?
They just want to throw shit and then hide, and that's it. They're not interested in talking.
Hmm. Yeah. But and you're very open about it, obviously, like it's not something you're trying to hide and that's
Yeah.
there'd be no way for you to sneak past, the natural federations and things like that, right? Like it's very well publicly documented. They can see your pump, like,
Yeah,
and you're not the only type 1 diabetic to compete, like
right.
it's not super common, but
Yeah,
like
I've already gotten my therapeutic use exemption from the WNBF, so they don't have a problem with it.
no, no. And for those listening, most people probably know what that is, right? So therapeutic use exemption for most federations, because each federation unfortunately can like interpret it how they want to.
Hmm.
If it's a doctor prescribed substance that can be proven that there are no alternatives, right? In your case, there is no alternative. You don't produce insulin,
Right.
and that the lack of the prescription will cause like legitimate medical concerns and health complications.
Hmm.
More often than not, the federation will give an exemption.
Yeah,
Um, the only time they don't is for most of them is for testosterone because you
there's a
know
lot of room to play with that.
yeah, there's you can take more, you can take less, and like what you're naturally like you don't naturally produce any insulin. Everybody produces
Right.
some level of testosterone, right? And that is their natural level in theory. So like yeah, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, that is the comparison that a lot of people get, but
Mhm,
it doesn't track because I can only take exactly the correct amount because it's matched to carbohydrate intake.
mhm,
So it's you can't take extra insulin because I'm tied down to an insulin to carbohydrate ratio.
mhm. Yeah, where
So
with
if I, yeah,
cranking it up and if you hit the top peak of what's like considered natural, like well it's not really natural for you because you've boosted it
right.
like 300-400 mil, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So the retort to that would be if you consume, like as a non-diabetic, if you consume extra carbohydrates, you're going to produce more insulin. Does that mean that you've just taken extra insulin? No, because your body is set to an insulin to carb ratio.
Mhm. Yeah,
So it's like you're taking more insulin as a non-diabetic by eating more food, but you're going to have it's not going to change your muscle composition.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So
Hmm.
for an athlete that is enhanced, um, some of them do use insulin. What are they using it for?
So they're taking in what's the word?
Super
Glucose.
Super
physiological.
physiological. That's a
Yeah.
tough one, but they're taking in so many carbohydrates that they start to develop insulin resistance. And so, they're taking these drugs that make it so that they can make use of the extra carbohydrates, but their body isn't built to respond to that with insulin, and so they have to supplement with additional insulin so that they don't start. They are giving themselves type 2 diabetes, and they have to take the extra insulin in order to remain healthy.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Like you mentioned, like it's the use of other compounds that accelerates the recovery capability and the growth capabilities. It's not inherently the insulin itself. The insulin literally
It's a
serves
band-aid.
yeah. Yeah, the insulin serves one purpose, and that's to shuttle, glycogen out of the blood, right? Or glucose out
Right.
of the blood. So, it itself is not causing the growth. It is a shuttle, and that's really it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing to consider is that non-diabetics have um, a mediating effect where they still produce glucagon, which is a hormone that's responsible for causing the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream. So if a non-diabetic starts to go hypo, they have a glucagon response and it releases glucose to correct it.
Hmm.
In type 1 diabetics, that response no longer works because we don't have the mechanisms to remain in the center. And
Hmm.
so a non-diabetic that's taking steroids has this cushion of safety to where they can slam. Like I've had people being like, I've taken so much insulin and it's fine. I won't die from that. Why are you saying it'll kill you? It's because you have the innate ability to correct it biologically. I do not.
Regulate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The non-diabetic body has homeostasis or the ability to at least try for that, right? Where you
Yes.
just don't without the monitor and the insulin and things like that.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's where some people get confused, like if you're diabetic, why are you eating these like sugary candies and things like that? And it's exactly for that reason, right? Like you can very
Yes.
easily go hypoglycemic and you have to artificially increase it because your body's not going to do it on its own.
Yeah. Other people have an. It's like a transmission. Everybody else is running automatic, I have a manual. It's as simple as that.
A potentially stupid question. Can you take exogenous glucagon?
Yes, it's you get prescribed it as a rescue medication. So if you're suffering from a severe hypoglycemic event and you start to lose consciousness, somebody can grab the glucagon pack and inject it into you to bring you back to consciousness.
Hmm. Almost kind of like a an EpiPen then, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that something you have on hand or?
Yes. Yeah, and you have to, occasionally get a new one because it expires, and I don't know if it actually expires. I feel like that's a big glucagon telling me that I need to get a new pen every so often.
I don't think it's one you want to test though, right?
No, I'll keep getting a new pen. It's fine.
Oh, they put that label on any food though. Like you'll get
Yeah.
like I think the joke is like there's like Himalayan salt. It's like millions of years old, expires in 2026. It's like, yeah, it's been millions of years, but expires next year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. How convenient.
Yeah, that was it.
Have
Oh
you
man.
ever had to use the glucagon?
Luckily not. No, I haven't lost consciousness as a result of a hypo. And I hope I don't. Even at camp, we've had severe lows, but we've never had somebody lose consciousness, which is great.
Correct me
Mhm.
if I'm wrong, but you as a bodybuilder, I feel like with how you probably manage your schedule, your routine, your food, your diet, I'm guessing manage it better than most diabetics who are living a more spontaneous, non-bodybuilding lifestyle,
Yeah,
I'll call it.
that was how my endo put it during diagnosis. He was like, "You're kind of the ideal candidate to develop type 1 diabetes because hypertrophy training specifically is really good as a long-term treatment because the more muscle you have, the more energy you're expending just existing. And so it's like, and then as a response to training, your insulin sensitivity increased. And so you have this acute effect where it's like after you exercise at a relatively high intensity, you take less insulin for the same response. And
Mhm.
so there's so many different factors to where it's like hypertrophy training is a really good long-term medicine for type 1.
Mhm. So if you were to give advice to somebody, in your shoes, back when you were first diagnosed, is that kind of the route you would take? Get into resistance training, standardize your eating, those kind of things, or are there
Yeah,
other factors as well?
for sure. The lifestyle of bodybuilding is just really good for type 1 diabetics because you have to start tracking.
Mhm.
You have to get an idea of what a handful of chips is carbohydrate wise.
Mhm.
So it's like those two lifestyles are very complementary of one another.
Mhm. Yeah. Anything else that we've overlooked a little bit? Like we talked the nutrition for sure. We kind of just briefed over the training. Did you have to adjust your training at all, or when you train, or anything like that?
No, I didn't have to adjust any of that. I never want to change anything in my life to have diabetes fit with it. I would rather learn how to manage my diabetes so that I can live my life as I would like to live. And that's a broad statement, but it does apply to training where it's like I'm not going to let diabetes mess with how I train.
Mhm. Any?
And then,
Go ahead.
or you say something about training. I wanted to cover nutrition, how that is impacted, but.
No.
So, yeah, are there any, what is the impact of that to your nutrition? Do you manage nutrition similar to any other bodybuilder? Do you have eat maybe less carbohydrates than somebody else in pushing a massing phase at 700 grams of carbs?
Right.
Or, how does, dieting down, what's the
Dieting is
impact?
where it gets tricky because you have a set caloric target and
Yeah.
you have your macros planned out. But if I go hypo, then I have to take in more carbohydrates so I can go back to a healthy blood sugar. And so it's like it's very easy to hypo your way out of your caloric target. But the strategy to deal with that is to treat carbs and fats as like a balancing scale. So where it's like if I have
Okay.
a hypo event, then I can just pull back on the fats later in the day. So it kind of evens out a bit. And the same goes the other way, where
Okay.
it's like if I'm good and I've been running pretty low with carb intake, my blood sugar's good, then I can just go in the other direction.
And is there I've heard there is a glycemic effect of protein. Is there one with fat or not at all?
All three macronutrients will eventually
That's
have
what I
that sort of
thought.
effect. Yeah.
Okay. But is it per calorie it's less impactful, would you
It's
say?
it's tough to narrow it down because there's so many different factors that go into there's 40 different over 40 factors that affect your blood sugar.
Yeah.
And
Because
so
you said you like if you need to ingest more carbohydrates, you can just drop your fat, but if it
yes.
were a calorie equated thing, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that, right? I wouldn't think. But
What do you mean?
I think he's saying that like the carbohydrates have much a more dramatic response. Yeah.
Oh, yes, to the blood sugar.
yeah.
Yes, you do have to yeah. Yes. If your fats are hiked up, the glucose response is much easier to deal with for fats than it is for carbs because it's I forget what the number is. I think protein starts to have a noticeable increase after like 2 hours. Fats is 5 hours. You'll start to notice a stubborn trend upward. Whereas if you take a pack of Sour Patch Kids within 15 minutes, you're going to start to see an upward spike.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that, when you're planning out your meals, are you really taking a look at like the combination of those, right? Like the idea of like a mixed meal where you're like trying to blunt some of that response with the
Yes, I'm always trying to find ways to increase, or what's the term? Lower the glycemic load of a meal. And you can do that through like whole grains as opposed to processed grains. You'll have a slower glucose response. Adding protein and fats can fortify it, and you'll digest it more slowly, and you'll have a more tapered glucose response. So
Mhm.
it's not like I'm obsessed with it because I don't want it to impact. I want to enjoy eating. I don't want it to be a math equation every time I go to eat. So it's just a mild conscious effort to try and improve the glycemic load of what I'm taking in.
Mhm.
And are there
And
any times a day you tend to allocate your carbohydrates? Like I think about I'm trying to allocate around my training, right? Is that something that you think about? Is it something like, okay, it makes sense to have some carbs intra because that's when I tend to go hypo or
I'll have a meal before I work out that's higher in carbohydrates, but I also throw in a lot more protein so that it holds me steady and can counteract a drop that will tend to happen during training. And it's
okay,
funny
so
because powerlifters, when you're powerlifting, you have this full body kind of shock, fight or flight response when you're training as a powerlifter. And so type 1 powerlifters will experience a spike because their body's releasing some sugar so that they can prepare for this traumatic event that their body thinks they're going through. Whereas with bodybuilding, it's you're causing the damage to your muscle and your body. Um, we'll respond to that with the hypo. Typically, it's more
do you see any
complicated.
of that with taking a rep all the way to failure or anything like that or not really?
Yeah, if it's a high, well, it evens out because if it's a higher intensity day, um, my blood sugar will tend to slowly increase, but afterwards it'll plummet.
Okay.
yeah, so it's like the average of the session rather than just like one small event, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Have you and Berto talked anything about like peaking protocols? That's what jumps to mind the most, right? Because I'm just thinking you said like the slow digesting carbs. I'm like, oh geez, like we're looking
Yeah.
at white rice, Cheerios, honey, like all the things that aren't slow digesting for peaking.
Yeah, that's been standing over my shoulder, like this, enjoy this 1,000 grams of carbs. And it's like, I don't, because it's hard to practice for that in a reasonable way. And so I'm just going to have to figure it out as I go, improving from show to show.
I would
Mhm.
imagine you'd probably take a linear load. You probably wouldn't do a rapid backload.
I don't know how I would deal with that because that's like I always gather data of not physically, but making note of response to whatever protocol of carbohydrates. And it's like, that's so far out of the realm of what I'm used to that I have no idea how I'm going to deal with that. But I'm excited to figure it out.
What's the closest you've come to? Like, what's the like most like high amount of carbs, short period of time? Like, what's the your best guess on peaking so far?
In a single meal, like maybe 180, 200 grams in a total day, think I've ever really gone over like 500 grams.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
wanted to
even,
put this out there so people could understand like the dramatic difference, right? Because you threw that 1,000 out and like there's a lot of guys, not even like big guys, that's kind of the load that they're using.
really?
Yeah, sometimes one day, sometimes spread over like 2 days.
Sure.
Yeah, but like that's what Dan was talking, like a more linear load for you where you start like, 50, 75, 100, 125, and you're just like easing into it so you can
Yeah.
adjust your responses as you need to versus
Mhm.
like throw it all,
Yeah, because that's the thing. If you're dosing for a super high carbohydrate meal, you have to do what's called a split bolus. Because if you take in the full dose, your blood sugar is going to plummet way before your body has the opportunity to get that carbohydrate into your bloodstream. And so
Mhm.
you would take whatever 60% of the anticipated dose, note the response, and then you would go from there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of thought, a lot of math constantly going into this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's kind of sad that like you do have to have a decent grasp of math, and it's not complicated math. But there are kids with like developmental delays or autism that aren't capable
Hmm.
of doing math, and so it's like you could be walking them through how to bolus for a meal, and they are incapable of it, and you're realizing like this person cannot be independent in their treatment, and it's tough.
This is where AI comes in. This is where AI saves the day.
Yeah, just
I'm
bolus
being
for me.
serious. I'm joking, but serious.
Yeah, I mean it would. Yeah, it probably will because it's a learned response though, and it's so individualized that I don't know. We're going to have a lot of improvements in AI to be able to account for
Oh,
how
sure.
individualized it is.
Hmm. Yeah. You're right though. Like I mean, unfortunately, that's a population that gets not enough attention anyway. But when
Right.
you start looking at like these kind of medical conditions, it's like, yeah, like even the most, yeah, I can't even
It's
fathom
tough.
being a caretaker and like having to worry about that,
Oh,
because
dude.
just like nonverbal children,
Yeah.
how do you even address that? And yeah,
Yeah.
there's a whole man. That's
At,
a
at camp, our glucose monitors have a sharing function to where it transmits the data to the parents,
okay.
and we have them turn it off while they're at camp so that we can encourage independence and get these kids used to figuring it out on their own and not having a backseat diabetic trying to guide them. It's fantastic.
Hmm. Well, let's talk about the camp because I know that's very important to you. We could talk bodybuilding all day. We'll
Sure.
wrap up with that, but I know like that's a platform that you really want to share. What does that look like? How did you get involved? And how are you kind of like helping and educating this next generation?
Yeah. I found out about it through social media. Another person was posting about it. So that got me going. It happened to be like 2 hours away. So I was like, oh, this is sweet. I'd never done anything like that. Like I never attended camp as a kid, but um, on a whim, I decided to go, and it ended up being the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Getting to because these kids are at home, they're the diabetic kid. They get outed and they're treated differently. When they're at camp, um, they they get to just be a kid, and it's the best thing ever. So
Mhm.
try to support camps and do what you can to get
Mhm.
them.
Now, did you go for the first time as like a counselor or as an adult like instructor, or did you go when you were first diagnosed like as a an attendee for lack of better terms?
Say it again. Sorry.
So when you were first introduced to it, did you go like to learn yourself, or did you kind of come in as one of like the adult counselors or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, I started as a counselor. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, and now's the time, right? So if you want to share information about that camp specifically for those listening, people, if there's a way for people to, assist that camp, the name of it, social medias, all that kind of stuff, let us hear it.
Yes. There's one in Fairleigh, Vermont in the summer. That's Camp Carefree. Like I'll send a link to you guys.
Hmm.
There's Winter Weekend. That's wait no. Camp Carefree is in New Durham, New Hampshire. Winter Weekend is in Fairleigh, Vermont. And then Memories Made is the charity that um, raises funds to send financially disadvantaged kids to these camps.
Okay.
We'll have Leroy link all that below. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's, I'm sure no real like barriers to entry, just anybody, with a diagnosis able to come so long as they can
Right.
financially can do it. And then obviously, like you said, these charities are trying to like pitch in where possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What about like resources outside of those camps, right? Like you have your group and it seems like that's a great group within social media, like self-educate and like support each other, but any like educational resources that you leaned on that you would want to share to others?
I could scrounge some together because it is very piecemeal as you're dealing with the chaos of diabetes. It's like because you do have to educate yourself. There really isn't a ton of resources available to learning how to manage the condition.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I could find some stuff for you for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe as we post this up on the socials, you'll have some links and we can just kind of like fill out the comment section. That way people
Yeah,
kind of coming to the link can find it.
Mentioned the diabetes group that you're in. Could you talk more about that, maybe?
that happened completely like accident almost. Like I didn't realize what I was getting into, for better and for worse, because it's turned into complete chaos in there. But it's great because everybody that joins, they're like, I have people that I can talk to that understand, and I can vent, and like, because like when something goes wrong as a type 1 diabetic, there's not really anybody you can relate to who would be like, yeah, what do you mean you had your CGM get ripped out by the top of your car getting into it? And it's like these specific events that we have to deal with. It's nice having an outlet for it, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of just craziness that goes on in there. And it's great because we all have the same experience of dealing with this.
What's the name of that group and how do people find it if they want to join it?
It's insulin junkies, and you just shoot me a DM and I'll add you to it.
I love the name.
No, and it's like this proxy for a camp. It's the same experience to where it's like
A
just getting a
community.
bunch of
Yeah.
diabetics. Yeah, exactly. And it's just about mutual support. We share our lifts in there. We give advice. There's a couple medical students. There's dietitians in there, so it's like having these kids be able to just casually ask these questions that they're not able to ask anybody else, or they'd have to like send an email and pay for a doctor's visit with their endo to get answers to these questions. And it's like you can just ask this person through a group, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
That
I
is
mean
awesome.
that's we bash social media a lot, but there are certain aspects where it is a beautiful,
Yeah,
and I think
it's
that
what you make of it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. All right. I think we've covered that. Honestly, I think that was a ton of information. I'm sure people are gonna like watch and rewatch that. I learned a lot myself even just from
sure.
that. Um, let's finish out a little bit on the bodybuilding, right?
Yeah,
Because I'm sure we could go on this all day.
for sure.
You mentioned Ocean State Natural. Is that intended to be your first show of the year?
Yes, it is. That'll be number one.
All right. What else you got planned out, or are you not releasing those just yet?
I don't know why people don't talk about what they're going to do. What's the reasoning behind why people don't they're reserved with sharing what they're doing?
I think sometimes people are trying to create like more hype than what there is. But also just they don't want to like if I go out there and put my name out saying like I'm going to be at XYZ show and then something happens,
Mhm.
they then like have to backtrack and it just kind of like looks bad
Yeah.
and just like showing up to the show they're going to do. So I don't know. There's probably more reasons than that, but I
Or
feel
the
like
artificial pressure that's the pressure that's put on you. Like,
Sure.
oh, being
Yeah.
at this show, and then yeah,
Yeah.
everyone
So
knows.
I can acknowledge that part and be like, I'll tell you, but I don't know if it's going to come through. But I'm looking at like Hercules, Natural Mania. Um, I would love to qualify for Mr. America. But like I don't know how to qualify because I'm not familiar with the different. Because you got to do amateur, then you got to do pro. You might have to do pro twice before you can qualify for whatever shows. And so
Mr.
it's like,
America, you would be eligible as an amateur today.
okay,
If you win a pro card though, at any organization, you'll be eligible to compete as a pro.
mhm,
gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say even likely, like knowing Mark, like if you sign up as an amateur, win a pro card, he could probably transfer you into the pro class.
Mhm.
Okay,
So yeah,
Yeah. That hasn't gone
but
like
Mr. America's unaffiliated though, so
right.
they kind of do their thing.
Yeah. Then end of the year, if I can do it, I would like to try to make worlds WNBF, but we'll see what happens.
Mhm. Yeah. So kind of taking the East Coast like WMBF approach,
Yes.
typical of like Berto and 3DMJ. They like to attend those shows, and those are well represented shows, right? Historical shows.
Yeah.
Wow. Other than obviously the ANBF show,
Mhm.
but we all know that Mike's gonna do a good job with that.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah. And then I'll start looking into OCB stuff. But I haven't looked at anything for NPC really. One guy reached out to talk about a show in the north side of Massachusetts, but I haven't looked much into NBC stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And as someone like who's competed a few times, just it comes down to prioritizing. Like there's so many organizations, so many shows to do, and to people that tell you do this
Right.
show, do that show, do that show, you should think about this show. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think for me, my advice would be to just think about what your goals are for the season and find shows that align with those goals.
Gotcha.
So that way it allows you to just prioritize. Um, because yeah, there's so many
Yeah.
shows,
It's
so many
chaos.
organizations. It's chaos.
There's so many letters, and it's
Yeah.
it's hard keeping track of all of them.
And your window for competing can tend to be tight, right? When you're
Right.
in condition. So
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah. But from the sounds of it, right? You said Hercules, which is June, but then you also mentioned Natural Mania, which is in the fall, right? So like you're
Yeah.
potentially looking at like competing across the entirety of the year. But I mean that's no like Berto's done it himself. He's coached people through it, so that's less concerning knowing
Yeah.
that.
We haven't ironed out a plan just yet, but
Okay, so
it
he's going to be
just
listening.
shows that.
No,
Yeah.
no, we're not doing that.
Right. Exactly. I'm doing every show in the Northeast, all of them throughout the rest of the year. I'm doing a lot of.
There you go. You better prepare. Yeah.
All those charity funds are actually going directly to Zach so he can fund the season.
Yes, dude.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. No, I love it. That was a really insightful episode. So I'm hoping that, I'll probably be at a couple of those shows. I hope to meet you in person this year. I know
Good.
a lot of people are probably looking the same, eyeing you up, seeing what's going to come of the season. I think
Hmm.
you're going to do great things. I think Dan and I can both agree. Like you have an amazing physique, great, great head on your shoulders, and I think you'll do well with this sport. So yeah.
Kill it.
If
Thank you guys.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If people want to follow your journey, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and the best way to follow?
Z Moore 1216 on IG. I think that's my only. That's the only place I post. So that's it.
There we go. Simple. I
Oh
like
yeah.
it. All right. Well, again, we thank you for coming on. We thank you for your time. And for our viewers and listeners, we thank you guys as well for making it through the episode. If you liked it, obviously like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff, just so we can help grow the page and grow the sport. And like Zach said, if you have any other questions, you heard about the resources, you heard about the group, and I'm sure that he would love to help you guys out if you fall in the same kind of path as him. So I think that's going to be it for this episode, and we'll see you guys in the next one.